Welcome. Welcome to those that are joining here. And we will get started in just a moment. Good evening, all. Looks like we have people still filtering in, so we're going to get started in just a moment. Right. Well, we have people still filtering in, but we are going to get started on time here at 7:01. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program. My name is Jessica McDonald. I am a board member with the League of Women Voters and your moderator host for tonight's discussion on workforce housing. So first of all, let's get out of the way some Zoom tips. We are on a webinar, so you can ask your questions through the Q&A box. Sit back, relax. You don't have to keep on your video because you can't do that. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available as a link through the League of Women Voters YouTube channel after this event. Please do continue throughout the program as questions arise to submit anytime those questions. We have saved a good amount of time at the end to be able to have discussion and questions and answers with our panelists. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan education and advocacy organization. And at the core of what we do, who we are, is an organization empowering voters and defending democracy. The League of Women Voters takes positions on issues that matter to you, to your family, to your community, from voting rights to climate change, community planning, and programs like tonight's program on affordable housing. So if you're out there in this virtual world and you're interested in what we're talking about, and you're thinking, how do I get involved? How do I support access to housing? Where can I find my voice? Then I'm here to welcome you into the League of Women Voters and encourage you to join us. I also want to put a plug that we have free membership to everyone at 25 years of age and under. Tonight's program is hosted by the Housing Committee of the League of Women Voters in partnership with the housing committees of the Corvallis Sustainability Coalition and the Linn Benton branch of the NAACP. I encourage you to visit each of these organizations, each of which has a housing committee, get involved and be engaged. At the League, we believe that any opportunity, any program, talk, event is an opportunity to also provide a smidge of education about our democratic process. And so I'm going to bend your ear for just a second. With our May primaries coming up, I wanted to take the opportunity to point out a few items related to voter rights and the primary. So first of all, some dates. The primary election coming up on May 21st. And then the last day to register to vote and the last day to change your voter party designation or update that is April 30th. So why is this important? Oregon is a state with generally closed primaries. This means that only voters registered to one of the two major parties is allowed to take part in voting for candidates. Essentially, primary elections are held by parties to determine their nominee for the general election in November. Since non-affiliated voters are not seeking a party nomination, the belief is that they cannot participate in the primary. The League of Women Voters of Oregon and leagues across the country have taken stances advocating for open primaries where non-affiliated voters can have a role in the voting process. Why is this so important? Well, because the largest group of registered voters in Oregon are non-affiliated voters. It was in 2022 when non-affiliated voters surpassed Democrats in Oregon to become the leading bloc of voters in the state. 36% of voters are non-affiliated in the state, 34% in Benton County. And not one person in that 34% in Benton County, which is the largest voting bloc in our county, can participate in a closed primary election. So what I might ask of you today, know the last day to register to vote, which is also the same day as the last day to register and change the party designation for a primary. Talk to your neighbors, younger colleagues, family. Ask if they prefer to remain non-affiliated or if they want to take part in the primary elections and update their designation and party status. Give them information on where and how to update that registration information if they are interested. On to this program. This evening, we are hearing from panelists on the topic of workforce housing. We are happy to have the panelists here this evening. Helen Higgins, Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club of Corvallis. Helen will be providing context on the issue around affordable workforce housing and why more is needed in our community. Jackie Keogh, Executive Director of Rooted Homes, is a nonprofit organization in Central Oregon that is committed to providing environmentally sustainable and permanently affordable housing. Jackie will be discussing what is working in Central Oregon and why. Eli Spevak, the founder of Orange Splot, a housing development company pioneering new models of green infill housing in Portland and beyond. Eli will discuss the many ways to create affordable green housing and how to make use of creative use of infill. Please remember to submit your questions through the Q&A box. We have saved ample time for questions to the panelists at the end of their presentations. And with that, I would like to welcome Helen Higgins to lead us off this evening. Helen?
Okay, yep, I'm here. I hit that button twice. All right, everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Really appreciate the invitation to be here and to share a project that we're doing through the Boys and Girls Club of Corvallis to really get at one of the issues that I'm coming across and some of my fellow business and organizational leaders are facing, which is making sure that we can house our workforce. So just start in with a couple of setting the context for you. So I'll start with, we need housing across the entire continuum. So we've got shortages in every area that you see on here. There's some really great work that's being done in our local community on low-income housing, lots of funding that's moving in that direction. The piece that I'm noticing is the gap, and the project that we're working on is really focused right here on this affordable rental housing will be the project that I'm working on, but really more holistically, how do we make sure that people that are in that sort of 85 to 150% of income or average median income can actually afford housing within our communities? Because even at what you would think would be really good income levels, we've got folks that are coming in to take our jobs that just can't find a place to live and can't afford the places that we do have available. So just to kind of give you the things that we're seeing within Corvallis as far as some of our challenges, really lack of middle housing, actually all housing is contributing to a workforce shortage. So I am actually in a group with other business leaders, both public and private. And one of the things that we're really noticing is that we are facing employee shortages. We're struggling with retention. We're struggling to fill roles. That's everything across education to healthcare, childcare, the trades, government. I love to ask this question. How long did it take you to wait in line to get a prescription filled at the last time that you went to a pharmacy? Or can you have you made a doctor's appointment lately, and how many months did it take you to get in to see your primary care provider? Even at restaurants, when you do get seated, how much longer is it taking for you to actually get served? So when we're lacking the, the workforce, what happens is that it's really hard to grow your business. Heck, even in my industry, it's really hard to just make sure that we have enough people to serve the kids that do need to be served. And that obstacle that we're facing is employees, and the obstacles that they're facing is an affordable place to live. So there's lots of different examples that have been shared with me and that we've had where we get somebody on board, they're really excited to come in and work for us, work in this community. And then they go down the path of trying to find a place to live or a place to rent. And often it comes back with, there's just no place to live. So we know of businesses in town that have actually lost some really skilled people that would have been great, assets to our community, but they couldn't find a place. So they ended up rescinding the position and moving on. So that's probably one of the biggest issues that we should all be concerned about within our local community. So really that lack of housing, it's a systemic issue, and it shows up in a lot of different ways. I just mentioned a couple of them, but we're also seeing that about 62% of our residents are paying greater than 30% of their income for housing. And that 30% or greater is really where they qualify you as being rent burdened. In 2020, about 60% of families in Corvallis were unable to afford a home. And as the last time I looked, near the end of February, the median sale price was about $550,000. And in order to afford that, you'd need to have a family salary of about $166,000. That might have been calculated before interest rates went up. And then we have probably about a less than 1% rental vacancy rate. Again, we're a college town, so there's a lot of pressure on rentals, which of course it's supply and demand, and that drives up the cost of the rentals. And then where we're really starting to see this is we're actually losing families in our community. And again, from a sustainability standpoint, if you don't have young people that are growing their families in the community, you start to lose a really important aspect that makes for a healthy community. So within our own school district, they have lost 700 students over the last 7 years. They are predicting the loss of another 600 students over the next 2 years. And really what's happening is we've got just if they're coming into our community to work, they're getting pushed further and further out of the community. Excuse me. Which leads to this problem and this picture. So some of you may have heard the statistic that we have about 21,000 cars that drive into our community, and then they drive back out of our community every day to work our local jobs. So they're driving in to work our jobs. We really need to find a way that they can live in the place where they're working. So what are we doing about it at the Boys and Girls Club? So we're working on a pilot concept with employer-assisted housing. So what that means is that the housing or the rentals or homes are owned by the company, and they are for the sole use of the employees of the organization, and they're generally offered as part of the benefits package, and rent or the purchase price is usually subsidized. This is not a new model. It's used today in a lot of other communities. Universities tend to use this. It's really one of the only ways that I've come across that you can legally designate housing for workforce. So what we're working on is, and these are some pictures in process. We're building a project off of 23rd and a little bit south of Grant. And we are going to build these units designated to our professional full-time employees. They will be eligible for reduced rate rentals. It'll be part of their compensation package. The rental rates will be set at about 65% of fair market rental rates, which is a HUD number. And then we're going to be targeting to get these rental rates at somewhere between 18 to 20% of their income level. And really one of our other goals is we want to support our employees to save and to build their own financial equity, and maybe someday, be able to afford a house in this community. It's really important to us that these are really quality units, because these are young professionals that they're out of school, or they've been out of school for 5 to 10 years. So we really want to put them into something that really kind of meets that stage of their life. So we'll have 4 units. The club will own, manage, and maintain these townhouses. and they should be ready to move in by September. And everybody loves a picture. So I thought I'd just pop a quick picture up here, at least of the first level of the units. So we're going to have 2 3-bedroom units. We'll have 1 2-bedroom unit. And then I've been told this is a bit of a unicorn. We're going to have a 1-bedroom unit, which actually we got this onto the property as an ADU because the way that the development codes have changed, we were able to put 1 ADU onto a tax lot. What's nice about this layout is that if I have an employee that doesn't want 3 bedrooms, because the way this is designed with the 3rd bedroom on the main floor, we can just close this door right here and lock it off. And then that way you've just got access to a 2-bedroom townhouse. And then it also gives us some flexibility should we need to have like a short-term stay. It's outfitted basically like a hotel room. So let me share some thoughts on addressing our housing needs through this pilot. And so, of course, with everything, it's always harder than you think it's going to be. So I've learned that there's a lot more to getting housing built than just a good idea. So as you probably all have heard, the governor has a stated goal of building 36,000 new units per year. So there's a lot of work that's being done on housing production. One of the things that I would recommend and that I have been doing, and I think part of what tonight is helping us do, is to continue to lobby for funding at both the state and the local level to help pay for infrastructure. Because though that's, and I'm going to show you here in a minute, infrastructure is really a big piece of trying to get something, before you can even put a shovel in the ground. So there's a couple of Senate bills that passed, Senate Bill 1530 and 1537, where it's designating $100 million for cities to use for infrastructure needs. And then they also passed a $75 million revolving loan that cities could use to kind of encourage developers to build less expensive homes. And the only way that developers are going to be able to build less expensive homes is if they can also get some help on the infrastructure piece. So what I thought I would do is I'm going to show you a real live example of what it costs to get a housing project started. So this is before we even were able to put any of the sticks in the ground. So on the left is just an example of all of the fees that hit when you go to get a building permit. So on a $1 million project, we're paying $116,000 on fees, et cetera. It's about 16.5% of the total project cost, which is pretty significant. What we also discovered is that we are being required to upgrade the sewer pipe that's underneath 23rd Street. We're being asked to go down and make the pipe bigger, even though we're going to have to downsize that new pipe into the pipe of our project because it doesn't require that bigger pipe. What I know is that cities are really challenged with their infrastructure. They're looking for ways that they can, get new pipes under the ground. And if we're really left to passing those costs on to people that are trying to get development started, it becomes really overwhelming or somewhat unattainable to try to get some of these developments going. So I just wanted to point this out because this is real life of what we're paying just to get this project up and running, which of course affects affordability. The other thing that I've learned is that we have, I'm sure all communities have it, but Corvallis, we have design criteria, and there is actually a menu of design criteria in the code. I listed some of them here that have to be done as part of building out your project. And really the message I want to share here is that these additional requirements can add up to 10% to the overall cost to build. And they're not codes that are necessarily related to safety. They are really, over time in our community, they were subjective design criteria that were put into the codes just over the years. And I'm sure they were trying to get at aesthetics or uniformity or, some kind of a neighborhood design. And over time, they have their costs associated. So what we're learning is that the more criteria that exists, it means that there are more inspections needed, which means that there's more time in the overall project, and then that just increases your costs. So one of the things I just like to suggest is that perhaps as the collective, we start looking at how do we really tackle adding housing and workforce housing to our community, perhaps this is an area that we could examine, and, and see if really we still need to continue to do things in this way. So, my thought around this is, how do we level the playing field for workforce and housing? So one of the things that I think that we need to do is we've got to look at developing policies that would allow and encourage workforce housing designations. So I said earlier that the only way that we could find to do this project was to define it as employer assisted housing, because that allows you to do some of these things that we're doing with a little bit more flexibility. And it allows us, most importantly, to designate the housing for the people that we're trying to house. You'll often hear me say that just building more houses will not solve this problem. We've got within our community, because we're a very popular community to move to, we're a college town. As soon as you build homes, people move into them, investors purchase them, and when you've got cash buyers coming in and giving $50,000 to $100,000 over asking price, our local workforce employees, they can't keep up. So in my mind, there has to be a way that we can carve out and make sure that we can create that balance in the community by creating a way for them to say, these units are for workhouse, just like we do for workforce, just like we do for low income. The other thing we could look at is developing more financial incentives towards middle income housing. So the legislature, again, they have moved forward with some money through these Senate bills that includes funding for projects that go up to 120% of median income, which is new, so it's great. But if you look at what that 120% of median income, in Corvallis, it would be about 117,000 for a family of 4. If you go to the 150%, it's about 147,000. But going back to the earlier point, family salary needed to be able to get into a house in Corvallis is about $166,000 a year. So it still doesn't stack up. I want to just do a quick sidebar and kind of go down into, I would call a one step into the weeds, just to share a little bit more detail with you. At the local level, I think we really need to just continue to address development processes and codes that slow down and increase costs. So some of the things that I think would be helpful based on our real-time experience is if we could look at funding building process coordinators whose job it would be to steward these permits and inspections through the process. And you wonder, why would you want that? Well, just to get a building permit, there are 5 distinct departments that must review and sign off on the application. And oftentimes they either get lost or delayed, slowed down for a variety of reasons. And then once you get the project going, there are 7 distinct departments that must sign off, both in the midst of the project and then before you can actually close it out and move into it. And the tricky thing is it only takes one department to stop or delay the entire approval process. So it would be really nice to have somebody who is assigned to you to make sure that things are moving forward. The other thing that I would suggest is that we fund building code liaisons to assist the builders. So why would we do that? Well, right now the building code book is about 1,400 pages. And the way our community works is that the builders are responsible for the initial code interpretation, which of course creates a guessing game. And there's a lot of back and forth that happens with the city, because my interpretation of the code is not always the interpretation of city staff. So again, it sets up for a pretty contentious dynamic and tends to slow the process down. So again, the message is projects they need to keep moving. So development also needs certainty, because time is literally money when you're constructing homes and buildings. So let's get to what you could do. So one of the things that you could do is, add workforce housing into the community housing priority conversation. So I can't tell if we have any elected officials on this call, but, go to your elected officials, talk to them about the way that we're doing business as it relates to building housing in our community. And then what are the city's priorities around housing? Do we have metrics? The governor has 36,000 units in a year. What is Corvallis and Benton counties metric on housing? And do we have a workforce housing goal per year? Perhaps we should. I would also say that you could advocate to expand the criteria for the use of the system development charges. And also there's an affordable housing fund or tax that you probably saw. It was about $7,500 that right now is only being used or can be used for low-income housing. But what if we were to expand the use of those funds so that they could support some of the infrastructure expenses of workforce housing projects in addition to low income? The other thing is, join in. So if there's anybody out there, if you're sitting on some land or you've got, an older house that perhaps could be torn down, consider, partner with another small business in town or another nonprofit, and see if maybe you could help get some more workforce housing pilot projects going. I'd be happy to give you the details on what we're learning. And the other one is just get involved. So testify at meetings in support of development. Oftentimes, the only people that our city council and county commissioners hear from are the people that are not in support of something. So writing a letter and showing up is super important. The other thing that I would say is you just got to be aware of what's in process and also be aware of what might be slowing projects down so that you can also be one of those voices. You can bring your voice, you could write a letter, you could meet with your counselor at one of the Saturday coffee corners. Anything to do to just keep bringing awareness to the message that, we need to become a community of yes, and to get more housing put into our community. So a couple of things that I am aware of, I know that OSU is working on changing some of their, I don't know what the technical terms are, but basically the policy codes on whether or not OSU can add more buildings onto their property. They are looking at adding more student housing, which would be a tremendous help in this community if they are able to do that easily and quickly. There's also a project in South Corvallis that Dev Northwest has probably been working on for 2 years that just continues to hit some of these hurdles around development. So get involved, find out what's getting in the way, and again, bring your voice to that. And then again, just testify to bring these changes, and others into the housing development codes, and then just also into our culture. We've had a long history of purposely designing code to keep this town small, and we've been incredibly effective. But now the downside is that we are losing our workforce and the people that can actually bring us the services and take care of our health and take care of our children, even though those numbers are declining. But we need to be able to bring those people into the community. So that's what we're working on with this employer-assisted pilot. So I really appreciate your interest, and I am going to now hand it over to Jackie.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. Give me one moment to share my screen. All right. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm Jackie Keogh. I'm the executive director of Rooted Homes. We build sustainable and affordable homeownership communities throughout Central Oregon. So we work in Deschutes, Crook, and Jefferson counties. Rooted Homes has, because of the need and in the housing prices in Central Oregon, Rooted Homes has such a significant influx of clients who are interested in purchasing homes. And because of all the systemic barriers that Helen went over, we are limited in how many folks we can serve. A great example is our last community lottery. We had 300 folks apply. 50 of them were mortgage ready. They could have bought a home the next day. And they had applied for 7 homes. And so what Rooted Homes started to look at is how can we be more intentional on who purchases our homes in the terms of who everyone needs our homes, but who impacts our economy in the sense of our local workforce. And so that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So if you're not familiar with us, Rooted Homes, is a nonprofit, and we're essentially dual mission focused. So we don't just build affordable housing, we build sustainable, high quality in housing. And having been in the affordable industry for so long, sometimes that quality can get lost because of all the costs and restrictions the industry puts on the housing. Our intention is for folks to feel the value that they would of a market rate home. And so our process is very similar to a market rate purchase. They know exactly their purchase price. Their home itself is net zero, which means the home emits as much energy as it produces. Not only does this allow us to ensure long-term affordability for our homeowners, they pay no more than $12 a month. And we all know an affordable mortgage can quickly become unaffordable when folks are spending hundreds of dollars in their utility bills each month. So that's one of their main reasons. And the other reason is that these homes are permanently affordable. We are Central Oregon's land trust. And what that means is we own the land and we steward the land underneath the home, and the homeowner owns the improvements or the home that you're seeing in that picture. That allows us, when the home sells, we don't lose one home on the market. We preserve that and it goes to another low-income home buyer. And we want these homes to be that high quality. So in 75 years, when these homes are reselling, they're still a valuable asset to the community. So just in case you're not familiar with Central Oregon, we in City of Bend, we're the fastest growing mid-sized city in America. Home prices, median home price is over $800,000. And in our counterpart city in Redmond, which is more industrial and more affordable, it's even, near $600,000. With these prices for both a home for purchase as well as rent, getting close to $3,000 a month now for a multi-bedroom apartment, folks are unable to retain their local workforce. We are seeing significant impacts that even if you don't personally need affordable housing, it's impacting you every day. So for example, you have to wait 2 hours in line to pick up your prescription. You can't just walk in and get your blood drawn when your doctor asks you to. That's going to take you all day wait in line. Restaurants are closing because their skeleton crew can't afford to live there. We see longer wait times in emergency response rates because emergency responders can't afford to live in the community they serve. And so they're driving hours outside of our urban growth boundary. And so for all those reasons and more, Central Oregon needs more affordable housing to support its workforce. As the most eastern hospital system in the state of Oregon, we consistently are seeing understaffed nurses and hospitalists, and that is impacting the care that we're able to give. And in Central Oregon, because we have an urban growth boundary, development can be scarce because most of the land has already been developed or is owned with plans to be developed. And so there's not accessible, cheap land just to build swaths of more housing. So I know I painted a dire picture there, but that's the need. And so Rooted Homes is one of the home ownership providers, is that we have 170 homes throughout those 3 counties that are under production. And as Helen so eloquently shared, affordable housing funding is limited if you're using public funding, and it does not increase as interest rates rise or construction rates rise. And so because of that, we essentially create this gap in what we have essentially put together is a program where those employers who are most impacted by employee retention or hiring because of housing costs are putting cash in to ensure that their employees have somewhere to live. And that's where we've been able to balance that gap. So with our employer partnerships, we had a pilot program that we had 35 interested employers. And that program was underwritten by the Bend Chamber, so they funded the entire program. What it proved is from Sister School District to Mount Bachelor Ski Resort to St. Charles Health Systems to Mosaic Medical, all have significant and are willing to pay money to ensure permanent affordability for their employees. And for us, we're able to do significant marketing and outreach to those who impact our community and the success of our economy. And so we have two essential programs. The employer can provide $10,000 in down payment assistance to their employee, or they can give $50,000. And with the $50,000, they are written into the deed, which means that they're not just buying that house or helping that one-time employee. In perpetuity, every time the home resells, it would resell and be restricted to another nurse, for example, if St. Charles owned that. And through this partnership, we have been able to house a number of employees, mainly in the medical field, and those who are supporting our seniors with senior health care. Some folks might be scratching their heads thinking, that seems great, but is that fair? And so Rooted Homes went through a civil rights process to get a attorney review that allowed us to put this preference together. It's the first preference in the country, although others are modeling it, and we are so thrilled on that. So essentially, just like veterans sometimes get preference for veteran affordable housing, our homes give preference to folks who are partner employers and first-generation homebuyers. Those are folks whose themselves nor their parents have ever owned a home in the continental US, and therefore have likely had more impacts with housing instability and generational poverty. This is getting wonky, but that's who I am. So this is how it works. So essentially, folks, everyone can apply because it's a public lottery, and that's the most important part. However, folks with the most preference points are grouped into tiers together, and then we lotterize, for example, everyone with 3 points or everyone with 2 points. And then we essentially create a very significant list that allows us to move down that list and offer housing to those folks based on essentially most impacted population or highest need. The way we design it, if an employer brings as many employees as they're willing to sponsor homes for, and they will never miss that opportunity. The employers will always have that first priority. And so it's very important to know that no one wants a headline that someone's lost their job and also loses their housing. So housing is not contingent on continued employment. But when I ran this program in Lincoln County on the coast, we actually saw a higher retention rate of employers and employees because they purchased their home with their employer. The great thing about our program is that we want people to gain wealth and build wealth, not just through the purchase of their home. And homeowners who are in our program on average gain $80,000 in equity after 10 years. But on top of that, we want them to thrive in their careers. And so there's no income cap once you close with us. We've seen people who start as bank tellers who then end up as accountants, because when you take the stress out of having a home or having stable housing, you're able to thrive and really focus on other things in your life. As I mentioned, these homes will always be affordable. And so we essentially are creating two pipelines of affordable housing. One is our pipeline of new construction homes, which we continually build. We build one community every year. Our communities are generally 25 units or more. And then we also build, we don't build, but we have resales continually selling. And so cities like the city of Redmond, where we're planning to build 100 units, will always have that asset for their residents. I'm just going to end with a video, and I hope this works, because sometimes the technology can be tricky, but someone shout at me if this isn't working.
The volume is not, so you might go back to sharing your screen and make sure that it says share audio.
What I'll do, because I think this has happened before, is I'll just drop this link in the chat for folks in the Q&A if you want to watch this video. It's about one of the nurses at St. Charles who was unable to purchase a house until he met our program, and his strength now being housed in a city that he plans to raise his family. So I'll put that in the chat. And All right. And I have another slide, but it will not advance. So I will just say that I will also put my contact information in the chat if anyone has questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jackie. And fascinating. I would like to hand it off to our final speaker this evening, Eli Spevak.
Thank you so much. Thanks for including me. Let me get my screen up here. Share it and hit the magic button. Great. So my name is Eli Spevak. I'm a developer general contractor in Portland, Oregon. I'm a big fan of the League of Women Voters and got to work with Jackie when she was at Proud Ground, the community land trust in Portland. So my background, I came here 30 years ago working at Habitat for Humanity, did affordable housing development for about a decade, mostly or almost exclusively rental developments. Then I went off on my own through my company to develop co-housing communities, oftentimes with an affordable component. I've been pretty heavily involved in the rules of the game too. I've been on the planning commission here in Portland for, I think, 8 years. And I work with the AARP around the country, helping cities and states update their zoning codes to legalize less expensive housing. So that's probably what I'll focus on. But I'm also a developer. I'm sort of a developer with ADD. I do one project. If it goes well, great. If not, I guess I learned my lesson and then I do another one. I can't stand doing the same thing twice. So I will I'll try and have pictures in here so you can see some of the examples of projects. I want to figure out how I can advance the screen. Here we go. So we'll talk about zoning reform, which is a big thing in Oregon. Also a little bit about co-housing projects and how for-profit developers, which is what I am now, can partner with nonprofits. But one of my big motivations is that for zoning reform is the size of households. So if you look at from 1950 to 2005, 1950 homes were a lot smaller. There were 983 square feet on average. 2008, 2,500 square foot for the average house, while family size has shrunk during that time period. So we're all like needing more space. And just to take it home for Oregon, if you look at the chart on the upper right, if you can see it on your screen, 1960, 53% of households had 3 or more people in them. That's the green wedge. So that's 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010s where I cut it off. And by 2010, nearly 2/3 of households have just 1 or 2 people. And yet the average new home was like 2,500 square feet. And that's partly, actually, it's largely driven by zoning. If you can just build one house on a lot, you can build a big house. And our families just aren't that large anymore. So Portland's kind of known to be progressive on land use, but look at our zoning map. That yellow is single family zoning. And it has gone up from our original zoning code where we had 20% of our land for single family. Now it's 44% of the land area. Corvallis is somewhat similar. That's your map. The beige, light beige is your single family zones or single dwelling zones. And this is actually common across Oregon. It's really typical to have much of the city's land area be 1 house per lot. And of course, Oregon's made some changes. So now you can do more than 1 house per lot in those situations. And the theme on those changes is really to re-legalize housing choices from 100 years ago. So the upper left, that's a cottage cluster from outside of Washington, D.C., a little suburb there. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I'd pull some examples from the East Coast. Row houses, really common housing type there. The tiny house on wheels, we have tiny houses now. The boarding house, some sort of shared housing. And in the bottom right, that's the accessory dwelling unit that Thomas Jefferson built, where he lived with his family, had the first kids before they built the whole estate. And that was pretty common. You build the ADU first, and then you build the main house later. So some things Oregon has been doing, which are Oregon's really been a leader on this. We started with the more easy stuff. We made sure that every community allowed an accessory dwelling unit, which is a smaller house relative to the main home. And in 2017, that was codified in state law. Many cities already allowed ADUs before that. Then in 2023, we passed HB 2001, which requires cities to allow duplex, triplex, quads, cottage clusters on residential lots. Smaller cities only had to do duplexes. Corvallis is in the large city department. We also, tiny homes isn't a statewide law at this point, although Portland allows 1 on every lot now. But shared housing is legalized through the state action. Oregon followed Portland's lead to say that you can't discriminate based on who's related to who in a household. Those laws are pretty common in many zoning codes. And looking ahead, I think there's going to be some interest in looking at some of our closer neighborhoods to see maybe some of those would go back to becoming multi-dwelling zoned. But we start with the easy stuff, is accessory dwelling units. This is on my block. My friend Carolyn and Bruce built this one in their side yard to move into it as they got older themselves. And in the meantime, it's been a short-term rental. It's been housing for a neighbor who is renovating their home. It's a long-term rental. It keeps changing its uses. Right now, living in it as a household who had their house burned down and they're rebuilding it while they stay in the ADU. ADUs are very flexible and they come with different flavors. There's that type. There's a conversion of garages. Sometimes you build them inside an existing house. Sometimes it might be under a house. Those are pretty common to renovate a basement, put new walls on it, and make it living space so you can't even see it from the street. But relevant for this conversation is ADUs can become starter homes for workforce folks. And I did the first project in Oregon where we separated the ownership between the house and the ADU. It was called Sabin Green. It's in the upper left corner there. We had two houses, and behind each house was a detached ADU. The home sold for like 300,000 and change. The ADU sold for $100,000 and change. This is 15 years ago. I can say that since then, the house in the front have doubled in value at least to 600,000 or more. The ADUs in the back have also doubled in value to a little over $200,000, way less than any other home on the market in the street. And their market rate, there's no subsidy involved there. Other people have done homes as well, where they've sold the home. And actually, if you look in the multiple listing service in Portland, you'll see, I think up to this point, dozens of homes at any one time where the house and the ADU are sold separately. They're both owner occupied in those situations. Here are some examples. There's one developer who's building really nicely designed ADUs at the $400,000 price point and selling the main house separately. A dozen of those. And then other production efficiencies happen. Wolf tiny homes. Usually those are not sold separately, but they could be. And some companies that sort of specialize in ADUs. We have enough people doing it in Portland. They figured out how to slot them into lots in the backyards usually where you really can't tell they're there from the street. So Portland went through a boom of ADUs. You can see it on the graph here. We were building well over one a day for several years, and then it's gone back down again. I think it's about like 180 a year now, because now there's other options you can do on a lot. And that gets us to some of the things allowed by the residential infill project, which is what we call it in Portland, but statewide it's HB 2001. Where we re-legalize these older housing types. You might have in your neighborhoods too, where you have like a cottage cluster or a little courtyard plex. Those are now allowed in more places. And so I already mentioned HB 2001. If you have look at your zoning map where you see all the beige in Corvallis, in each one of those lots now you can have a wider variety of housing types. They would typically be more homes and smaller than they originally were. So here's how Portland implemented it. And I think this might be useful. I didn't look too closely at Corvallis's code, although I did skim it. But here's how ours came about, which I think might be somewhat unique. Average old homes in Portland, about 1,500 square feet. If you skip over to the 40,450, that was the largest single family home that had been permitted recently in the year 2013. But there are lots of homes that were getting built at the 2,600 to 3,000 square foot size. And there are a lot of neighbors who were getting pissed at that, to be candid. And our zoning code would have allowed people to build a house at 6,750 square foot on a 50 by 100 foot lot, because it's only restricted by how high it could be and the setbacks. 3 stories with our setbacks, you could build a huge house there. So the concept of our residential infill project was to say, hey, the biggest home you can build is 2,500 square feet, half the site area of a 5,000 square foot lot. But if you build more than one home, you can get a little bit bigger, up to 4,000 by getting 4 units. And you also have all these menu of options you can do instead of just a single family house. So you already could do a house with an accessory dwelling unit, or on corner lots for Portland, 20 years, you could do a corner duplex. We already had those available. And then with our residential infill project, you could do a duplex on any lot, a house with 2 ADUs, a duplex with an ADU, a triplex, a fourplex, and then city council added on an option that if you make half the homes affordable, you could go up to 6 units on a lot. Very hard to pull that off. You really kind of need to be a nonprofit to do it with some subsidy, but that was an option so that affordable housing nonprofits could get a little bit more homes. And then complying with state law, we allowed attached homes, added the cottage cluster component, and a detached duplex. So you could really have 2 houses similar size to each other on the same lot, one in the front, one in the back. And then this is the math slide. So apologies for those who might not like it, but this is actually a key ingredient of what Portland did. If you look at R5, which is our most common zone. If you build one house, you can have FAR of 5, which means a 2,500 square foot house. If you do a house in an ADU or a duplex, you get 0.6, which is 3,000 square feet between the two of them. 0.7, 0.8 if you go to 3 or 4 units. A 0.8 FAR, that means about a 4,000 square feet, which means you're getting 4 homes for a total of 4,000. It's about 1,000 square foot each. And then if you do affordable, then you actually get another bump up in how much you can build. And the reason this is important is because it's an incentive to build more little homes. And we also have the cottage cluster. I'll get to back into a minute what's actually happened with this, because it's like, who cares what the code does? What matters is how the implementation yields. Cottage clusters were also allowed. The state required it. And this has been a pretty popular item. Not many have been built yet, but for a large site, maybe with a house on it, this is a way builders can go straight to permit. They don't have to go through a land division or a plan development. They can go straight to permit. And also it gives people the chance to have their own 4 walls, which in the Northwest, people really love having 4 walls not connected. I personally do projects where homes are attached to each other, 2 or 3 in a group usually, because you can get more open space that way. But I totally recognize the draw to have not attached housing. And the state also required cities to provide an option where you can do a land division of one of these middle housing types. So if you have a 4-plex, you can set it up so each one's on its own lot rather than having to go through a condominium. Although in practice, I suspect most people are going to do the condominium process because it's much more flexible. I'm curious what Corvallis is doing, but in Portland, that's certainly the theme. So we've had, after our code change, we had 1 year of track records to look at. The city studied it. This is an example of a 4-plex on a corner lot. And here's what we found. It turned out that single dwelling homes dropped off and they weren't as big, which is not surprising. ADUs, we had about the same numbers we had the year before, 180. Sometimes people build the ADU with a house. That's not uncommon. But if you look at the orange bars here, that's the things that were newly allowed by the residential infill project. And one is having a second ADU. That's the 69. That's probably people who already had one ADU and they took the chance to have a second one out that they could. But the 271 number, that is mostly 4-plex units. And also a few other duplexes and triplex. And it really has totally changed what gets built in our town. Here's some takeaways, and here's some pictures of them too. The vast majority of homes of new housing units built were middle housing, things allowed by the state. 4-plexes were the main piece of that. These homes are more efficient and they're more appropriate to family size. And they also prevented really large homes from getting built. And there's not bad thing. And here's some pictures of them. So in the upper left, this is an example of a 4-plex. It's the size of a really large house, but it's got 4 homes in it. On the upper right, this is an example of a house which has 2 detached ADUs behind it. So we have from the street, it's just a house, and we've got a couple of homes tucked in the back. The bottom right is another 4-plex. They're a little bit easier to pull off on the corners, but you see the mid-block as well. And the bottom left is a little more modern, fancy 4-plex. Once again, from the street, it looks like a duplex, but there's 2 homes tucked behind it. The other thing that we've been doing is allowing even less expensive than homes. And this is not as much for your middle housing, but group housing. I've done one project in the upper left corner there where you have 8-bedroom home with a 3-bedroom accessory dwelling unit, and then a mirror image on the next lot for like a co-living project. It's not really college housing, and people end up being in their 30s and 40s is my experience, but a really community-oriented development. Some cities have, and Portland's one of them, has made it easier to site shelters and housing for people who otherwise are on the street, and make sure zoning is not blocking that. And as I mentioned before, with tiny houses, Portland now allows one on every residential lot. They'd much rather have tiny homes on residential lots than in the street, which is also happening commonly in our community. And the last thing I'll mention on the zoning thread is more multi-dwelling zoning. So I put this up. This is on the right side of your screen is Portland's current zoning map. It's yellow is single family zoning. On the left is that same geographic area. And if you know Portland, you might see Ladd's Addition. That's the little X in the bottom left. That's Portland's original zoning map where I've colored in using today's colors. Blue is multifamily. So if you look at that, most of this area that was within walking distance of downtown Portland still is. was zoned for multi-dwellings, but over the years, it's become single-family zoning. And I think there's probably a strong case to make, both for environmental reasons, and because people can walk to work, putting jobs near housing, and for displacement reasons, because those neighborhoods are already fairly well off, and there are high amenity areas. Housing sometimes that causes displacement. It's unfortunate, but it's better if people are displaced who can move a block or two away rather than further afield from the center of the city where people have already been displaced twice before and they're going to be displaced again as sprawl keeps pushing out. Some other strategies are to remove parking mandates because parking adds cost to projects. Not everyone wants a car or can afford one. And also an initiative we did here in Portland that I know other cities are copying is to work with nonprofits and faith-owned properties that may be forced to sell, to partner them up with affordable housing developers and perhaps upzone the sites so that they can become affordable housing on those sites. So a couple little images for some projects that I've worked on. This is that project I mentioned before with 2 houses and 2 accessory dwelling units. You can see them in the upper left-hand corner with the rendering, but that's been on the ground for about 15 years. And we have a nice little natural building in the middle of the courtyard that's a shared amenity. This is one where I live. I'm actually in one of the homes right now. Cully Grove. It's 16 homes on 2 acres, where the homes are organized into 1, 2, and 3 unit buildings around some shared common courtyards and a shared common house. So it's a co-housing community in Portland, and the parking is all stuck to one edge. This predates the current zoning code rules, but the homes were a lot less expensive than they would have been in this neighborhood had they been a bunch of single-family homes on their own lots. There's another image from this community. And then there's some times I get to partner with nonprofits. So obviously Proud Ground is the community land trust here in Portland. I was on their board when they got started. And I've worked also in Corvallis with Willamette Neighborhood Housing Services, now Dev Northwest. So this project, for those of you who might recognize it more recently, I just thought I'd toss these images in from when Coho Corvallis was first built. I worked on this when I was in my affordable housing days. And I was there just 6 months ago, and it is absolutely verdant. I've been there many times since, but it's amazing how this project has grown up. But originally, 8 of those homes were affordable with some subsidy from the county, from Benton County, and one of the homes was affordable for households living with disabilities. So that was a nice partnership between the co-housing community and in the affordable housing community. This is one I did in Portland called Woolsey Corner. It's 8 homes on one property that was originally set up as 4 narrow skinny homes. Well, we put 8 homes on it with a density transfer and made these homes, all of them, permanently affordable. This is 14 homes in a community. 3 of them I partnered with Proud Ground once again to make those permanently affordable. The rest are market rate. And this is a larger project. This is 23 homes on 1.5 acres with a nice common house and a courtyard and a sauna and fun stuff like that. Once again, I got to team up with with Portland and the city to have 3 of those be permanently affordable. The rest are market rate. And this is one that we're under construction right now. It's my last slide, I think. And so this is I'm sort of a guinea pig. So when Portland allowed up to 6 homes on a lot, as long as half are affordable, I said, well, I'll give it a try. So I'm working right now, thanks to some of my funding from the Portland Clean Energy Fund, to make 2 sixplexes. And 9 of those homes will be permanently affordable with a land trust. And they'll also be net zero. So zero, all electric, no electric bills. And that picture on the bottom right is from earlier today. We're working on it today. So that's all from me. Thanks so much for inviting me to participate. I'm going to unshare my screen. Okay.
Thank you so much, Eli and Helen and Jackie. Fascinating. I want to put a reminder out to everybody that's in the audience. We have questions coming in, but if there's something that you burning question, please make sure to put it in the Q&A, because we are now turning to the Q&A portion of the evening. And what I'm going to start with is a question that came up several times in the chat. And so I'm going to start there, because I think maybe 4 or 5 different people asked a question around private equity investment companies buying up home sites. Specifically, a lot of those questions are related to Corvallis, but I'm sure this is being seen in other areas. And just questions about what is that impact and what is the effect on the cost of homes? Does it affect a town like Corvallis having more rentals and more Airbnbs. So this might be a question that I'd throw out to the group and not necessarily to any one individual.
I'll just stumble along for a second. I've heard that it depends. This is a trend in some parts of the country, and it varies enormously from one part of the country to another. And I've not heard it being a huge issue in Portland, but I have heard some parts, especially in the southeast part of the United States, where investors have bought up a significant enough percentage of the housing stock to constrain the housing market. But I don't know the situation in Corvallis for sure.
Yeah, I would just jump in and say private equity investors as well as second home owners have displaced a majority of the local workforce in Central Oregon, because not only are they driving up the home prices, but the existing housing stock that would be your starter home essentially is no longer available, because they either exist as second homes or they're purchased as by private equity firms and then rent it out, where folks can't build wealth or have control of prices.
Great. Well, I have a couple of questions that may be targeted to specific presentations. And Jackie, maybe just to follow up with you, are the rooted homes tax exempt for property taxes?
So the land is tax exempt in Deschutes County. That's a new policy that we are in support of. The home itself is not tax exempt, so the homeowner pays taxes on their improvements, but when you remove the cost of land, it's significantly less, and we factor all of that into the affordability.
And I can jump in on there. I believe that local governments have the option to exempt from property taxes. I know that in Portland, they give you 10-year limited tax abatement, and I assume that that's available in other communities. Is that not the case?
I think
Well, for our project, they'll be taxed. So
Okay.
because if we can't put it under our nonprofit 501c3, because we're not doing business in the unit, so these will be the people that live there, or the club will be paying the property tax.
There were, Eli, you talked a little bit about walkability, and sort of, certainly you're in a really urban space as well, but there was a question on the mixed retail components with housing, and also that tying to walkability and access to grocery and work in different parts of our life. And so how does that, I think the question was specific to Helen, but really anybody, like, how does that come into play? How does walkability, was that considered as part of the location siting and sort of values of where you're building? And are there greater barriers for mixed use with housing?
I passed on a couple lots recently that are lovely, like acre-sized lots, because you can't easily walk to regular things you need in life, like grocery store, coffee shop. And also I don't like building much parking. Sometimes I do build it, but not always. And I want to be realistic. So I think that people who live in my project usually want to, they're living their values and they're picking their homes. And if I build a really green house in a suburban location where someone had to make every trip by a car, they wouldn't go there. So I feel like it's a priority to me to try and build housing where people can live, not every trip, but at least on many of their trips, they can walk.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, rooted homes, we really believe in geographic equity, and so that folks have access to all parts of the city, not just the most affordable areas where the affordable housing tends to be concentrated. We want folks to have access to green spaces, walkability, as well as to the best schools that the city offers. And then we agree with Eli, we're trying to build affordable housing, not parking lots. And so what we try to do, and we have with every single one of our communities, we offer one parking spot, but recognizing that, larger families need that second transportation option, we gift every homeowner an electric bike, and that allows them to further their sustainability values and reduce their carbon emissions.
And our property is actually, I think, I don't know, 2 blocks away from Fred Meyer and Woodstock's Pizza and a gas station. And it's about a little under 1.5 miles from work. And there's a lot of good bus transportation. And I would also speak that, you know, in a community like Corvallis, where we have pretty high vacancy rate in retail spaces, making that a requirement can actually stop a project, because we have a lot of vacancy in retail spaces now. So the incentive to say you can only build these units if you put retail on the bottom has stopped some projects. So you just, you know, you kind of have to figure out what your community needs more of. And right now, at least in our community, we need housing. We need places for people to live.
There was a question about the employees, and this is something that both with Jackie and Helen. Jackie, you talked about that, sort of the caveat that the employee does not need to stay with that employer. There was also a question about, you know, with the Boys and Girls Club project, does that, if there's an employee that isn't really interested in staying, but then they're kind of feel like, oh, I'm locked in because this is a great opportunity that I have through this housing. Are there dynamics there that you're considering, Helen? And if so, like how to kind of monitor those?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is not the perfect solution. You know, our goal is to get some units in place for employees so we can attract them and retain them. It's a benefit. So it's very much like if you stop working for us, you're not going to, you know, get a contribution to your retirement fund, and you're not going to have medical benefits. So that is definitely a downside. I think what we're trying to do is we're just trying to get something going. So we're trying to, you know, this will not be the beginning and end of taking a step forward, but I think one of the advantages that we have as a small nonprofit organization is that we can move quickly. And my hope is that we can inspire other ideas, because I think we just need to bring a lot of different types of ideas and try some things, see what we can do to push on existing regulations, existing policies, you know, maybe open up some new funding streams. So, you know, is this the end all be all answer? Of course not. You know, if an employee does not have to take this housing, it's totally an option. So they're not required to live in these units. If they choose to go work, you know, for the county or whatever, they're leaving the organization, they're leaving the benefit. Part of what we're trying to do also is retain our employees, because we don't have PERS. So we don't have the ability to offer the benefits that government workers receive, which is a disadvantage for us. So one of the competitive advantages that we hope to be able to bring is that we can bring housing, which is something that's within our control. We can't afford and do some of those other benefits that quite frankly other employers can do.
Thank you, Helen. Eli, you talked about some of the shelter and tiny houses and some of the other opportunities to maybe address more of a continuum of care for housing. There's a question on this front of, you know, are there opportunities to build off of the creative ideas and the work that is happening in these different examples across each of your examples, to think about more on the chronic homelessness side of the continuum, or there things that come to mind where this is maybe a stepping stone to a larger conversation?
Well, I was thrilled when Portland and then the state got rid of requirements that made it illegal to be roommates with certain people. I mean, Portland's code used to be you could have up to 5 people related by blood or marriage. And sorry, you could have as many people as you want in a house, but no more than as long as they're related by blood or marriage, but unrelated individuals were capped. And it seems odd that you'd be asking residents whether they're related to each other to decide whether they get to live there or not. So I'm glad, because people really they're doubling up. I mean, folks are trying to get off the streets, and we shouldn't make them being out of compliance with the zoning code for doing that. And the zoning code there used to be more SROs. Very few have been built lately. There's some that are legacy, single room occupancy, and people are living in tiny houses. And I think that even an accessory dwelling unit, which is, a small home, they cost well over $100,000 to build now. They're out of reach for many people. So creating the ability to legally live in a smaller, less expensive spot, which they exist. I mean, they're called tiny homes or mobile homes or RVs. And they can meet basic sanitation and safety requirements. I think it's great to let the private market house some people. There will always be a need also for nonprofits to team up with local government and wraparound services to provide shelter housing. And sometimes those shelter proposals get stymied with neighborhood location challenges, like they get fought. So Portland made it, so if we can actually raise the local resources to provide shelter, let's not get that stuck, and you can't even cite it anywhere. So that was another thing, is to make sure that those things are not, you don't require a conditional use. You can do it by right up to a certain size. They're still capped, and have more flexibility for locating them. So I'm really cheered that we've done some of those things, because we need more. We need way more of that housing than we have.
Great, thank you. For Jackie and Eli, Helen had shared really eloquently the permitting obstacles and challenges and costs, that have been encountered. And just from your perspective, in Central Oregon and Portland, navigating the permitting process, is this resonate with you? What Helen was describing? Are there areas where that has been alleviated or made it more easy, or is it just as difficult?
So what I've experienced is that the legislature passes, really powerful bills, right? Like look at House Bill 2001 that really incentivized a lot of the middle housing and tiny house building that Eli's presentation referenced. But then the cities don't get any training on how to implement that policy. And so what we have found in Central Oregon, we generally use the cottage cluster code to maximize homes on a smaller site or a larger site and just maximize homes. We found that we're always the first to use that code, and therefore it takes us twice as long to permit, because we're literally having to teach, or in some terrible cases, disagree with the city on, what the interpretation of that code should be. And so it costs projects not just money, but time. Our projects have been delayed by up to 8 months because of that. And that, when we're in a housing crisis, to me is inexcusable. And so, we really worked on the governor's bill that just passed this legislative cycle about funding to help train cities on how to implement policy, and having a production office at the state that can support them. And so we're really happy that that passed, because it's a huge barrier and an unintended consequence the legislature's kind of put in place.
I will say Portland gets a lot of grief for being very slow and expensive in permitting. And I've permitted a project in Gresham, just outside, in 2 weeks, and Portland takes 3 to 4 months for a regular old building permit, right? I think Portland is admittedly more complicated, the codes they have to implement, but they should be faster. In terms of fees, the system development charges that I saw on the screen about Corvallis, thanks for sharing those, Helen. Those aren't big compared to, those are, our fees are that or larger. But Portland waives them for low-income housing projects. So that's something local government has discretion to do, is to not charge those if there's an income threshold on the homes, whether they're rented or owned. We have a long way to go in terms of making permitting faster in Portland. We have just a huge bureaucracy. We're changing our form of government. I'm hopeful that gets better, but it is a legitimate challenge. It takes a long time to get through permitting.
I'd like to turn to, we have 2 questions about potential taxes as a way to help. And we have one question about, what about considerations or responses to the idea of a local payroll tax to develop affordable housing? And then there's another question about have folks heard of more of a land value tax, so taxing the land rather than the building might encourage more infill housing, especially in parking lots, and not tax the housing project itself. Anyone talking about this in our region for either of those 2 ideas?
I'll just start with the first half of that question, where the club is paying for this project, so it's more than just a payroll tax. I mean, we're actually footing the bill to pay for this project. So I guess what I would say is I would be open to payroll taxes towards housing if we could guarantee that that housing is going to go to people that are here working in our local economy, without it getting snapped up by somebody else. And so, that's the challenge that we have, is how do we build housing that we can legally designate to our workforce that we desperately need. It sounds like in all of our communities. And that's, I think, the thing, at least that we're trying to test out, is how do you do this? Because that's the next problem that we need to solve.
I love the land value tax. I mean, it's it basically taxes the land and not the structures to encourage people to use the land better. And there's a lot of great fairness reasons why it's a good idea. However, politically, there's not going to be a huge shift like that. I just don't, I'm not dreaming of it. But there could be stuff that Oregon does to shift the tax burden, a shift rather than a whole sweep, so that we start taxing land more and structures less. So I think that's maybe a more viable path, but it's a great idea.
Great, thank you for those responses. I think this might be a question related to the model that Helen, that you're showcasing today on, that's talking about like recruiting new people into our community, being able to live in a place. What about, are there incentives or other alternatives that you're also looking at as part of that benefit package for existing, home people, employees within the organization? So are there ways to kind of look at both ends of that spectrum?
As far as specifically for housing, do you think the question was
Yeah,
about?
I think
or
the
just in
question was, are
general?
you dealing with supporting current homeowners and renters within your employee base, as well as recruiting those new into those?
Yeah, no, right now we're not. What we've been working on is really over the last, I would say, 5 years, getting our pay competitive, so that we're paying good wages, that we've got strong, medical, dental benefits. Those are the things that we've been focusing on. We're really bringing this kind of housing piece in, again, as another part of our toolkit. So, you all are really hearing the super early work that we're starting to do. And, we're very much into launch and learn. So we're walking down this path. We're gonna learn a whole bunch of stuff that we don't know. There's probably things that will change once we get this project rolling. So, and again, the scope of the number of employees that we're trying to house is relatively small. Again, we're really trying to say, look, folks in this community, this is another test concept, a pilot that we can move faster on. Let's learn from it and absolutely modify it. I'm sure there are better ways to do this. There's other approaches that we could take, but I guess we're kind of like on step one of this whole conversation around how do we support housing? How do we retain employees? How do I go out and find the right people to do the work within our organization? Because I can't just hire somebody off of the street to run our youth development programs. It is a specialized skill.
Thank you. Well, I'll just put in a plug that maybe, next year we need to have the update of this program with this, hearing how things have gone in terms of the housing project here locally. There was a question about kind of more, a bit more philosophically, like building wealth through home ownership is something that Rooted Homes, that Jackie, that you're talking about, and also Helen, when you're talking about how to kind of build that potential for future home ownership. And there's a question about, does this essentially perpetuate the issue of housing affordability, the idea of seeing housing as an investment, as rather than a utility? Does that continue to drive prices up in the future?
Yeah.
So in our land trust model, it does not. We're very cognizant of that. So our homeowners are restricted on how much they can resell the home for. So essentially, with the growth of area median income and housing costs, our resale restriction will actually make the house more affordable every time it resells. So our homes are priced to serve a household at 65% of the area median income, and that differs whatever county you're in. And that's the first time. The second time, we're forecasting that house to be affordable to someone at 50% area median income. So this idea of shared equity is a community approach where folks do get to use, own a home and build a portion of equity, but they don't get to essentially win the lottery by selling that house at top of market. It has to go back to another income qualified homeowner. And that's why I think we see both the state of Oregon and smart cities mandating permanent affordability in some of their funding.
I just agree. I think that what's happened with real estate is that, what was that book way back, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or something like that? Real estate has become the new traded sector. And it's about how much profit that you can make off of, these places where people need to live. So again, I can't do anything about that bigger problem. What I'm trying to do is there something that we can do to slightly start to shift the model and to move the power of the people that have all the funds, and can purchase up the land and to build these projects, and then we're just left to live in at whatever price is required to be paid. So I mean, I agree, it's really disturbing, and it seems like it moved really quickly, that now it is absolutely a commodity, and if you can't afford it, too bad, get out, the next person will come in. So again, it's not just for low income people, it's middle income people as well. They need a place to live. It's getting more and more difficult. And, I'm open to all kinds of ideas on how we can address this.
There are a couple of questions about ADUs specifically. And so Eli, there was a question targeted for your response around, what are the steps involved in building an ADU and then separating it from the main house and making both available for sale? How does that work given the minimum lot size requirements? And then I might tack on another ADU question about, are there attempts to sort of limit the short-term rental component of ADUs so that they maybe are for longer-term housing?
Okay, yeah, good questions. The first question, if you might imagine like a 40-unit building and someone submits to the condominium ownership, it doesn't have anything, the building has to meet the lot coverage requirements, the lot size requirements, but converting it to multiple owners is just a process with the state and the county. Your local city might not even be involved at all. It's just changing the form of ownership. So breaking it down to the level of a single lot with a house and an accessory dwelling unit, when I did that project, I never had to even tell the city I was doing it. I mean, the city has no role in whether it's owned as an owner occupant or rental. The zoning code is tenure neutral. That's the geeky way of saying it. There are occasionally cities that insert themselves in the condo process, like San Francisco has a lottery to make things into condominiums. But here in Oregon, I don't think that happens anywhere. People are not as familiar with condominiums, but it's pretty common to see even a duplex, side-by-side duplex split into condominium. It's not a land use process, it's just an ownership process. The question about ADUs and short-term rentals, Portland actually continues going back 12 years. They waive system development charges for accessory dwelling units, which are things like for water or sewer or parks. They don't charge it if you're doing an ADU because they wanted people to build ADUs, but they will only waive it if you agree for 10 years not to use it as a short-term rental. So in some ways, Portland's subsidizing ADUs a little bit, because the people who live there really do use city services, right? But they hold that back if you're going to use it as a short-term rental. I think that's been effective in Portland to not get as many. But it's true, ADUs make good short-term rentals. I mean, there's a lot of times the owner lives on site. ADUs get used for different things over their years. So it's tempting to have that as an option, even as in between, the grandparents living there and some other, or maybe the family expands and it takes over both the home and the ADU. Short-term rental is sort of a transitional use oftentimes. So that's the tension. I think people like to have that option available for their ADU, but also cities, if they're going to encourage new housing, if they're going to subsidize it, then they want to make sure that it's really housing someone long-term.
Thank you. We are getting to the end of our time. I wanted to ask an additional question, maybe to everybody, if you all had a response, a reflection. How is this person's question is, how is systemic racism and you know, the interest around equity and race in housing being addressed through either your efforts or just more generally, maybe your perspective on affordable and workforce housing.
Yeah, so it's no secret that the history of construction in the real estate industry and city actions like eminent domain takings have discriminatively impacted Black, Indigenous people of color more significantly, which has reduced folks' ability to gain generational wealth. And that's why we see, in part, a lot of the disparities for those impacted populations. Rooted Homes, our priority population are BIPOC households. And because of that, we are pretty thoughtful on how we can use preferences and home designs to not just get more people to apply to our homes. That's not enough. We have to break down like systemic racism in mortgage lending practices so that folks can actually get a mortgage and then purchase that home. We did an interesting thing. One of having first generation home buyers get preference, recognizing that most folks who are first generation identify as a person of color. We saw a 60% increase of BIPOC households purchasing our homes from one community to the next. So I think there's innovative preferences beyond just what you would like typical outreach practices to move folks forward. I also think that offering down payment assistance for BIPOC households is critical because they do not generally have as much familial wealth to be able to put down, the closing costs, the earnest money, or the down payment necessary. And of course, it's not enough. We'll never be able to, I think, address what our history in real estate has caused. But I think when we are thoughtful about putting those most impacted populations first, we can put some interesting policies in place to help support them.
I can chime in. I mean, zoning has an awful racist history. I don't know cities as well as I know Portland, but in Portland, going into the early teens and 20s, there were racial covenants saying that anyone living in this house cannot be of Asian descent or Japanese or Black. Those became unconstitutional, those restrictions. And Portland and other cities were quick to pivot and realize, well, we can't put that on the deeds anymore, but we can zone that only for single family use. Because it turns out in Oregon, race is income is a pretty good proxy for race. And if you have to have a single family home on a lot, then you're probably going to be white. And so our sweeping of single family zoning across Portland was in many ways to replace covenants, restrictive race-based covenants on deeds. And it was very effective at that. I think that the more recent thing that you've seen is more local control over zoning, either through local residents being able to contest projects because they have to go through a discretionary process. Well, the local residents who are most likely to successfully contest projects tend to be white and affluent and can hire attorneys to block stuff. Whereas if there's developments that are proposed in areas that are lower income and more racially diverse, the people living there already are less able to fight it. So you're seeing a trend in Oregon already had actually a lot of by right zoning, but more the ability to cite projects based on where the need is and not as much influenced by people who live there right now who might not like what it's going to look like and might try and contest it and delay the project. And the last thing I thought of is just I-10 mortgages. I mean, I think there are a lot of people in Portland who have sometimes really well-paying jobs and they're mortgage ready and they don't have a social security number. And there is one lender in Portland who will make an I-10 mortgage loan and they're not very good at it. So there's a lot of people who have really strong employment who just get boxed out of buying a home just because there's not a lender who will work with them.
Well, thank you, panelists, so much for being here. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for joining tonight for these wonderful questions. We will be making the recording of tonight's program available primarily through the League of Women Voters YouTube channel, although it will be shared through our partner organizations as well. And I want to also do a shout out to those partner organizations, the Linn Benton branch of the NAACP and the Corvallis Sustainability Coalition, along with the League of Women Voters and all of the housing committees and everybody that put this program on. And a special thank you to the panelists for your insightful comments tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.